thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you for a little while about generations in the workplace. My name is Barbara Schalie, and I'm a senior clinical training manager with Leidos Biomedical Research, and we support the Frederick National Lab for Cancer Research. But specifically, my organization supports the Division of Clinical Research of NIAID. And this is my 12th consecutive appearance at SOCRA, and I want to thank you all for your interest in what I have to say, because somebody must think it's worthwhile, so thank you so much. I have to say, though, this is my first plenary speech. Thank you, I guess. I feel much more comfortable in my little room with Anatoly. Wherever you are, Anatoly, thank you for the first 11 years, but I'll do my best to present for you. So 12 years ago, at my first presentation, I spoke about generations in the workplace then. The title was, Who's Out There and Why Do We Care? This presentation is and that was about the historical perspective of generations in the workplace. This talk is more about looking forward, looking at where those generations are today, and looking forward, how will they affect our ability to answer the Quincy's, Dr. Birdsong's, call to action. So we're going to talk a little bit about now and forward. This is my disclaimer. The government, which fortunately didn't shut down at midnight, thank you very much. So we'll live to do clinical research another day, it looks like. But obviously the government does not specifically, because they fund our work, does not imply any endorsement of anything that I have to say. So let's talk a little bit about where I got my perspective on generations in the workplace. My first perspective was, I've run into many of you over the years. It's been a pleasure. And I've been teaching human anatomy and physiology at the Frederick Community College for 27 years. And it is a gatekeeper course to get into clinicals for nurses. And I got to see over those 27 years how the audience that were in my class were changing. It used to be the audience that was in front of me every year were young women or maybe middle-aged women. As the years went on, we became more gender diverse, and then we became more generationally diverse. I also then entered clinical research about 17 years ago, and the clinical research enterprise is the most generationally diverse workplace that I've ever had the pleasure to work with. So we're going to talk a little bit about generations in the workplace. We're going to talk about the current generational composition of the workplace and the events that shaped their workplace experience. And then we're going to explain a little bit about the projected generational diversity, including the impact of the current generational diversity, and then what that impact is going to look like in the future. So we're going to be really looking forward, but the good news is there's been a lot of research conducted in this area, especially since two specific events have occurred. And the first one we're going to talk about are those that are going to talk about are the current generational composition and the events that have shaped their experience. And two of them are the changing global population and then the dreaded global COVID-19 pandemic. So we're going to start with a look at the global population. As you can see in the image on the left is the way the global population looked in 1970. It was very pyramidal. That means that the greatest number of people in the global population were young. But as we progress to 2015, now it looks more like a dome. And what that means is that there are more uniform numbers of people of the same age, of different ages, within the population. And then by the time we get to what we expect to be 2060, now it looks more like a skyscraper. And we expect the global population to have the most diverse ages, and therefore generational diversity will progress in the next several years. And why do we care about this? Well, it's because the global population predicts who's going to be available to work with you, who's going to be available to be your subjects, who's going to be available to fund you. So we want to talk a little bit about how the generations in the workplace are going to impact what we want to do. So we're going to talk just a minute about the dreaded global COVID-19 pandemic. And I just want to check out, the literature uses the word pervasive, that the global COVID-19 pandemic was pervasive. And I just want to ask you a question. It's hard to follow Dr. Bird's song with his singing and dancing. I only have 2 questions for you, sorry. But one question I'd like to ask you is, I'm going to ask you to put your hand up if you when you ask this question. How much do you think our industry, that is the clinical research arena, was impacted by COVID-19? Do you think it was slightly, or was it moderately, or was it significantly? So I'm going to ask those of you that think that COVID-19 only impacted us slightly, can you put your hands up? How about moderately? Put your hands up. Okay, own up to it. Significantly, put your hands up. Exactly, it was pervasive. And not only that, now I'm going to follow it up with my second question. I'd like you to put your hand up in order to reflect your personal experience. Were you personally slightly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, or were you moderately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, or significantly? And I'm not asking you bad or good, just the impact. So if you were slightly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, could you put your hand up? How about moderately? Okay, we have some people that were moderately. How about significantly? Yeah, so not only was the COVID-19 pandemic pervasive, but people were impacted in the same industry very differently. Some people experienced a lot of flexibility. Some people were not able to as easily adjust. And it may have even, for some people, not only could you not follow your dream, but maybe you weren't able to earn money to support your family. So the clinical research enterprise was extremely significantly impacted, as were our devoted professionals. And then the question is the pandemic finally over? Is it over? I know that I got my COVID shot on Wednesday before I boarded the plane to Montreal. I also got RSV and flu shot. I was a pincushion this week. But do we know if the pandemic is over? Is this now the new normal, or are we still evolving? And I'm going to slip in one more question. I really like your format, Dr. Birdsong. How many of you think that the pandemic is over and that the new normal is the way it's going to be? Raise your hand if you think it is. Okay. How many of you think that it's not, that we're still evolving? Okay. And some of you don't know, and most of us don't know. So again, here we have a group of very focused, devoted professionals who have very divergent ideas about what their workplace is going to look like. So let's talk a little bit about generations in the workplace. Now, again, I could easily talk for a whole hour just about the different generations. But this course, you can tell I teach anatomy and physiology. This presentation is about the general trend of generations in the workplace. And it used to be that we thought that a generation was about 20 years. It was the amount of time it took for a child to be born and to be raised. However, now the current thought is that a generation is about 15 to 18 years. But it's important to keep in mind that a generation is a chronological time slot. It's a chronological time slot during which a certain part of the population were born. Now, certainly they all experienced similar events, but they may have experienced them quite differently. So when we talk about generations in the workplace, you're probably aware, and this is going to be your 50,000-foot look at the 5 generations that are currently in the workplace. We have the traditionalists, sometimes they call them the silent generation, the greatest generation. They're our oldest members, and think about that. They're 80 years old, and they're still in the working population. And when I first started at Leidos Biomedical Research, 17 years ago, I was amazed when I asked the HR person who was onboarding me, how old is the oldest member of the team here? How many of you think that the person was in their 60s? How many think that person was in their 70s? How many think that person was in their 80s? How many think that they were in their 90s? The oldest person back 17 years ago was 83 years old. But think about today, Anthony Fauci. Some of you recognize that name, okay? Anthony Fauci was my boss. We're contractors, so we don't report to government oversight, but we are aligned with them. Anthony Fauci was at the top of my government oversight. Think of how old he was. And now I'm going to be 71 next weekend. Okay, and I have no thought of retiring. I love my job. I hope to come back and see you in Las Vegas. So again, so the traditionalists are the oldest member, but I'm a boomer. I'm a baby boomer. I was born in 1952, and then we have Gen X, and then we have Gen Y, and then we have Gen Z, and we're going to be welcoming another generation in a few years. So the idea here is that even though a typical generation it spans about 15 to 18 years, they've lived through similar events. They may have great diversity of thought and of experience and even behaviors. So one of the things we're going to talk to you about is, I was fortuitously put behind you, Dr. Birdsong, is how we can make our thought around clinical research as diverse and inclusive and equitable as possible by gathering all of the generations and avoiding stereotypes, and more looking at the individuals that make up each of the generations. So this visual just shows you how they're lined up in time, and it gives you the ages of each of the generations today. But again, we currently have, if you count in the traditionalists, and then you add in those, and you can see them all lined up here. If you look at the last one at the top, is Generation Alpha. Okay, they're about 7 years old now. So in 10 to, let's say 15 years, they're going to be joining you. And they might be potential participants in your studies. So again, a very generationally diverse environment. And to add to the generationally diverse environment, we have a phenomenon we call cuspers. And the term that I've read was that they're muddled generations. And what that means is that they're ages with unclear generational definitions. Well, in my mind, the cuspers are the people that are born in between the defined areas of the different generational numbers. Remember, generational numbers are fairly arbitrary, depending upon who you talk to, whether you're talking to Marsden or McCrindle. They could be a little bit different. The cuspers are in the middle, and they're the folks who look at the people who are older than they are, and they look at their colleagues, and they pick the best of both. So to me, the cuspers are the glue. They're the ones that look at the best in all of us, and they gather it up. So again, the gray color, the gray shows you, I'm not advancing here. The gray shows you how many cuspers there are. Okay, let's move on to objective 2. So let's talk about how the projected generational diversity and the impact on on the current workforce. So if you look at the world population by generation, what you can see is that in 2015 we had about 3 generations that were actively running the workforce. Okay, we had, and I'm going to be focusing just because I like the color orange, I'm going to be focusing on the millennials. But notice how we have 3 generations this is the world population by generation. Well, by the time we got to 2020, by the time we got to 2040, look at how the generations in the generations have changed in the world population. So in 2015, we have 3 groups. By 2020, we have 3 groups, but you can see the sizes have changed. 2015, we get the introduction of those Gen Zers. They're the up-and-comer. They're that passion that we were talking about. Then there's by 2030, now you've got four generations that are actively involved, and as the time goes on, the Gen Z will come on strong in the workplace. So as the world population diversity changes, so does our number of people or our pool of applicants to work with, either as employees or as participants. So if you take a look here, right now, if you look in this particular visual, you can see that baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials have pretty much equal representation in the workplace. It used to be that 1 or maybe 2 generations dominated the workplace. Not now. Now we have at least 3 generations that are vocal and have an opinion and have energy to add. So to look at the actual progression and the change of the mix of generations, if you look at, in 1995, you have the percentages, and you can see that the boomers were about 49%. So we kind of ruled the roost. We told you kids what to do. Well, let's see. Now look what's going on in 2015. Now we're equal in number. Okay, now we're equal in number. So the boomers are now 31, and the Gen Xers are 32%, and the millennials are 34%. Equal numbers available in the workplace. So you've got to respect the way they look at things, because they're going to affect how well you get your work done. Okay? And then, let me go back one more. See if it'll let me go back. It's okay. So with that in mind, if we look at the presence in the future workforce, the Gen Zs are going to be the Gen Zs are growing the fastest. The millennials are currently the largest percentage of the workforce within the next 5 years. But the Gen Xers, you're the ones that are going to have the jobs of leadership. Okay? Gen Xers, you're taking on the mantle of leadership because the boomers finally are retiring. Okay? And they expected a silver tsunami 5 to 8 years ago, and it didn't happen. But one of the good things, I'm an optimist, about the pandemic is that a lot of boomers said, hey, I've had enough. I've hit retirement age. I've got something they used to call a pension, so I can step out. So you Gen Xers, you're going to accept the mantle of leadership. And then, of course, the traditionalists, there's still going to be some traditionalists, but they, of course, will be the smallest percentage. Now, not only do we have intergenerational diversity, by intergenerational diversity, that means diversity among the different generations. But because of the size of the generations and the duration, we also have what we call intra-generational diversity. And what that means is that even within each of the generations, there are different groups of people. For example, if you look at Gen Z spans from kids that are young adults. You can tell I have children, I have growing children and grandchildren, and from 16 to 30 within Gen Z. Think of the difference between the perspective of a 16 to 19-year-old versus a 30-year-old. And then if you look if you look then at the millennials, you've got 4 different groups of people in your generation. You have people as young as 30. See, how do you like that? Those of you that are 30 being pointed out as young. Nice, right? But then some of you could be 49. Okay, so you have 4 different groups that might have divergent views on your workplace and how to do your work. And then if you look at the Gen Xers, they too have diversity among them because they could be as young as 50 and as old as 60. Think of how different you as a 40-year-old might be looking, as a 50-year-old, you might be looking at the difference between a 50-year-old and a 65-year-old. It's quite different, okay? So the idea here is, and of course the boomers, we're just kind of fading into the retirement phase, we hope, but those of us that choose to stay need to respect you. Need to respect the power of what you've learned that wasn't available for us when we were training. Okay, so let's move on to objective number 3. And that is, let's talk about the impact of all this projected generational diversity on the future of the workforce and how we should leverage it. Because if we're going to have a call to action, like Dr. Birdsong just talked about, we all have to be doing our best. We all have to be involved in being excellent at what we do. So the first thing I want to point out is the idea of avoiding stereotyping. And one of the things that Michael DeMock said about generations is that generations are a lens through which to understand societal change rather than a label with which to oversimplify differences between groups. And the Pew Research Center, if you're interested in reading about generational diversity, the Pew Research Center probably gives the most balanced look at generations in the workplace. There are people like McCrindle and Marston that have made a career of talking about the generations and their differences, but the Pew Research is really very objective research on the impact of generations in the workplace. So when we talk about generational stereotyping, what it is making assumptions about people based on the era in which they were born. It's kind of like putting people in little boxes. Now, I always say, I'm a really big girl, so I can't fit in a little box. And I've never been a little person, so I'm always trying to push out the edges. I don't know any of you, if you're in clinical research, you're innovators. You're innovators. You don't want a little small box right above your head that says, no, you can't do that because you're a millennial. Okay? So the idea is that what we want you to do is avoid stereotyping because of the year, the label on the chronological year in which the person was born. So, for example, if you look at the baby boomers in the workplace, many of the baby boomers choose to work past their traditional age of retirement. And career is part of who we are. Okay, well, there's a good reason, I think, why I'm still working, and that's because back in my day, it was cool to stay home and raise your kids. So I was an at-home mom until I was 40. I got my master's degree while I was doing that, but I didn't enter I didn't even enter the workplace, the adult workplace, until I was 40. So I've only been in the business 30 years. I'll bet a lot of you have been in the business a lot longer than me. How many of you have been in the business more than 30 years? Yeah, some of you have. Okay, so I'm running to catch up with you all. Okay, so the boomers have core values and traits and work ethics that help them to achieve the aspiration of their thought, of their behavior in the workplace. But a stereotype, looking at we boomers, you might think that maybe we're stubborn because we don't like to change things, and we may not even be very digitally literate. And I don't know where Emily or Alyssa are, but they had to deal with this dinosaur getting all of my stuff together the first time to get all my stuff together. So maybe it's somewhat true, okay? And then when you look at Gen Z in the workplace, you Gen Z folks, you like enjoying these, and again, these are trends that the Pew Research Center have identified, that the Gen X enjoys tackling new challenges. They seek that flexible work environment, and they want to have a work-life balance. We boomers would never have asked for a work-life balance. We lived to work. You Gen Zers, if you were to ask me what you gave me the idea that I should only do as much work as I need to live. That shouldn't be the focus of what I do. And the Gen Xers, their core values of autonomy and work-life balance and their freedom and their traits of being hard workers and their work ethics that make them efficient and self-reliant, well, that's great. It gives them the ability to achieve their aspirations, but if you look at them, you might think maybe they're negative because they don't like to do the things their parents did, or they might be cynical. That's a stereotype, okay? Let's go on and talk a little bit about the millennials. Millennials are the largest cohort, yay, and you value according to the Pew Foundation, collaborating environments with learning opportunities. I exist for your generation because you come to the office every day and say, okay, what are we going to learn today? What are we going to do? And your core values of interconnection, personal growth, individuality, you're eager and you're tech savvy, and you're ambitious multitaskers, okay, according to the Pew Center. But a stereotype that has been associated with your generation has been that you're lazy and entitled and unrealistic. Well, they must have run into all the millennials that I don't know, because I don't know any millennials and I'm a teacher, okay? I don't know lazy, entitled, and unrealistic millennials. I really don't. And then the last generation we're going to look at are the dreaded Gen Z, because they're coming on strong. They're right on your heels, Gen Y. They're going to give you a run for your money. And they're the first generation that are called what they call digital natives. They're the first ones that have had consistent, high-quality access to technology throughout their lives. So they're going to be the ones that they're into diversity and inclusion. There you go, diversity and inclusion, but also authenticity. And they're ambitious and they're pragmatic, okay? And they can be intense, and they are project-oriented. Well, all of those attributes allow them to achieve their aspirations. But some stereotypes that some folks have associated with Gen Z especially is that they have a short attention span. Well, maybe that's because they're multitaskers. So they're doing lots of different things at the same time. And they also, because of their experience with digital communication, this says instant gratification. My experience has been when they give me a paper to read, they type me back 10 minutes later and say, what do you think, Mrs. Schalie? I'm like, yeah, you got to give me another 10 more minutes, okay? Because I can't read as fast as you can think, okay? But the point is, that's a stereotype. And AARP, if you ever get the chance to read this, AARP came up with a somewhat amusing view of stereotypes in the workplace. And AARP's like, don't do it. Don't do it. You're selling the generation. You're selling every individual member of every generation short if you make your decisions based on stereotypes. Okay? So the literature says that categorizing a group of workers by generation can lead to overgeneralizations and improper assumptions about those workers, and perhaps even discrimination, okay? Employers and managers should focus on the needs of individual workers and the changing context of our work in relation to our job requirements instead of relying on generational stereotypes, okay? So, with all that in mind, let's talk a little bit let's talk about what we can do with this, keeping in mind that that adorable little baby who is 6 years old now is going to be 23 before you turn around. And they're going to, or even just a few things we notice about Gen Z is entering the workforce earlier, younger than the previous generation because they don't want to be encumbered by all that debt that you accrue when you get a 4-year degree. They're more into certifications and into job rotations and experience. So again, the Gen Zs are going to be entering the workforce faster. And the companies that are ready for them, they're the ones that are going to have the pick of the crop. I remember that when I spoke a few years ago, there was a prediction that within 5 years of the talk, 20% of the jobs in the American workplace would have to be fulfilled by people who had disabilities, and that the smartest companies were going to figure out how to use them. Okay, I'd like you to think about just the advertisements you see on television now of all the companies that are utilizing that segment of the population. Okay? Now what you need to think about is if people what exactly do people need to know if they're going to be clinical research professionals? If they're not going to go get an undergrad in pre-med or an undergrad in biology, what do they really need? What do they need to be able to answer the call to action? And I challenge you to think about that. And there were some excellent presentations, incidentally, on that in this conference. Now, one other thing I need to mention. All this data that I have is about the American workplace. It's quite different on the global workplace. That would be another topic for another year. How does the American workplace differ from the global workplace? Very interesting topic. Because how many of you are involved in international trials? Yeah, a few of you. And how many of you have international employees? Yeah, we do too. Okay, so again, it would be good for you to kind of look at what does the international workforce development look like. So what we're going to talk about, we're going to finish up really by talking about accommodating preferences. And the reason for this is we're going to focus on just one aspect of the preferences in the different groups. And that aspect is, where do people want to do their work? Where physically and with whom do they want to do their work? So the question on this survey had to do with how much time people spent working alone or doing other things. And if you can see on the right, you can see that the three generations, the Gen Z, the millennials, and the Gen Xers, they all spend similar amounts of time socializing and learning. The boomers are a little bit of an outlier, so we should keep our ears and our eyes open and see how we can accommodate or how we can work with the other generations to be able to accommodate what needs to be done. However, if you take a look at the working with others in person, the numbers are fairly similar, except for the boomers. Okay, they're a little bit different, but the three generations, the younger generations, are all pretty interested to the same amount of working in person. Okay, and then the same amount that you have the same homogeneity in the percentages of how much they like to work virtually. Okay? So again, the big difference is the working alone. And then another question that was asked was, would you rather have, okay, and boomers, hold on to your seats for this one. The question was, would you rather have a desk that was only used by you, but more expectation of working from the office? Look at those boomers. They like their desks. They like their stuff. Well, part of that is because we actually grew up in a generation where having an office was an indicator of position. Yes. How many of you know what a corner office is? How many of you have had corner offices? Yeah, not me. okay? So again, the idea of an office is an interesting concept in our current environment. And if you look at the next one, a desk that you share, but more opportunities to work remotely, okay? Again, look at the three younger generations. And an expectation to work remotely with available work settings on demand. The boomers call that the Gen Z want to be floaters. They want to float from one place to the other. I call it hoteling. They like, the younger generation, doesn't matter where they sit, as long as they have a monitor and a keyboard and one of those thingies that links us all together. I'm highly technical, as you can see, okay? My IT guy would melt if he heard me call it the thingy. But the point is that those generations are saying, hey, I don't care where I sit. I don't care whether it's in an office. And then the last one is a remote schedule with team rooms that you sign up for and have no assigned dates. Again, if you take a look at that, each of the three younger generations are more into not where they work, but how they work, their schedule. Okay? The other thing is, on this particular slide, what it points out is that younger generations are more likely to want to think and ideate at the office as well as third place locations. So this was a surprise to me. If you look on the left it says my company's office, co-working or third place, and my home. Okay, well, I expected the numbers to be different. And what you're seeing as you go across are Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, Boomer. I expected that the Gen Z weren't going to want to be at the office. Absolutely incorrect. The Gen Z is looking for a social component to be able to ideate with others of in their area. They want to collaborate. Same with the Millennials and Gen Xers, and actually the Boomers, when they're really doing that heavy-duty thinking, okay, they want to be at home. But when you look at I thought the Boomers would want to be at the office, not so much. So again, the question is, how can we make everyone comfortable doing their work where they're going to do it best? So even though we have preferences, each generation has preferences, let's talk about, one other thing I meant to say on the previous slide. Just recently, in the last 5 years, we have the advent of what they call the third place, where people like to work, where the younger generations like to work. How many of you are familiar with the concept of a third place? Well, what a third place is that our younger generations like to work in places like, perhaps, a coffee shop, a cafe, a library, a park, a place where they are stimulated to do their best work. And then there's also the advent of what we call co-working. Well, that's not as much, it is more being introduced in clinical research, but I come from manufacturing. I cut my teeth in a GMP facility, and they had a concept called an incubator. And an incubator was a common place that companies kind of paid into, lots of companies, and people from all different companies could come and ideate together. They could sit together and talk, or members of the same company could sit together. So the third place and the co-working location are coming into their own. So, another option for how to make people optimize where they do their work. Now, all that I've spoken about so far is our preferences, folks. They're preferences. And a preference is what you like to do when you get to pick. Like, for example, if I were to ask you, why are you wearing the color that you're wearing today? Okay, well, that could be a preference. For example, for me, I am a 17-year breast cancer survivor right now, so I'm wearing my pink in October, okay? So that's a preference. But I could have worn the color that any of you chose, right? So a preference is what, but that doesn't mean I can't wear colors other than pink. I can adapt, and especially in the industry you find yourselves in, you are innovators. Was that one of yours? Yeah, see? They put me after him for a reason. They just didn't know it, okay? You are innovators. You can figure this out. You can figure out other ways to do things that aren't the way we always did it. So what the research says is in the top performing companies, employees are nearly twice as likely to prefer the office for individual thinking and ideation. Okay, so again, look at that. 50% in the top 20%, the top performing companies, 53% prefer to be in the office or doing their ideation or their important thinking in the office. Okay, and if you look at the other side, the preferences on the right side don't necessarily reflect that. So the question is, how do you match up? How do you optimize your productivity and also accommodate preferences? So let's finish up by talking about this. This is some specific data indicating this, and what this shows you down the left are some pretty high-level cerebral activities that you all do every day. You brainstorm, you do all kinds of working with all kinds of very complex ideas. And if you look at the distribution, employees at the top performing companies consider their company's workplace to be the best place for a wide range of working activities. And if you look down the left, attending conferences, attending conference calls, solving problems. At top companies, 50%, 56%, 51%, it occurs in the company office. So, if you want to be in the top performing companies, if you believe, like some of you, I was having lunch with a fine young lady who is from and forgive me because I can't remember your name, but she's from San Jose, and she's right down the street from Apple and Google and LinkedIn, and they follow the lead. We were talking about different HR procedures. They follow the lead of the big boys. Okay, so if you want to lure people back to the office, how do you do that? What is it that makes co-working or alternative office spaces or even home attractive? And further, if you take a look at this one, this is another slide of the top performing companies, and all of the highly cerebral activities are mostly preferentially done at the company office. It's only when you get down to reflecting and writing and reading that being at home catches up to being at your office. So why is that? What is it at home that you can do better that you can do at the office? What is it about your office? Can you make your office, if you believe the literature, can you make your office more attractive to people, more comfortable, more efficient? Okay? And just a little bit of a global perspective. By a global perspective, globally, office workers say, and this was done very recently, this was in 2023, they say they need to spend more time in the office than they currently do to maximize productivity. And that's from office workers. And in the United States, they're saying that we need to spend about 11% more time in the office. Most companies are looking at 60% of their time being in the office as the sweet spot. 60% being in the office. Okay, so think about what that would mean, what that would mean in your office, and what that would mean about the way you do business. So why is this so important? Okay, so it's so important because until we can understand the differences and have warmth across those differences and see the reasons for the differences and the context of why we're seeing those differences or responses, we're just going to point fingers at everybody else rather than appreciate and embrace the strength of other generations. Understanding, as McCrindle says, always precedes empathy, and empathy is essential for community and cohesion among people of different generations. And I can't think of any enterprise more cohesive than the clinical research enterprise. When I got to listen to you folks interacting at this conference, you care about each other. You share with each other. So how do we enhance that? And what do we do with the information? Well, very basically, the classic information, the classic lessons learned are that we should all think about doing 5 things. We should rethink the boring stuff. If there's a lot of stuff that's boring, think if there are other ways to do it. Not impacting the outcome, but looking at the process. And perhaps even looking at flexing hours. Even flexing hours. Maybe have core hours. Maybe not even working 5 days a week. Or maybe maybe people could work on, people that had kids at home, maybe they could work on weekends. Think about flexing hours and help each of the generations learn and help them learn from each other and give them good reasons when you have to make a decision. Give them good reasons. Not because the most difficult thing for me to hear is for people to say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, you may not know that it's broken, okay? And maybe it could be better if you thought a little differently. So what we suggest is that you actually conduct focus groups to survey and collect generational preferences in your organization, even within your functions, and verify the validity of the suggestions that are in the literature about generational preferences. And even actively recruit staff from diverse generational groups to serve on decision-informing committees, because they will give you a 360-degree view of what needs to be done what could be done, the potential of what could be done in your organization. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your kind attention. I'm going to try to advance this. Come on. I'd like to thank you for your kind attention, and I don't know what we're doing about questions, but thank you for your persistent interest in generations in the workplace.